The screams that shattered the calm Wyoming evening were not the kind Willow Ellis had ever expected to hear outside her room at Selena's only boarding house. Pausing in the act of pinning up her auburn hair, she moved to the window and peered through the fading light at the scene unfolding in the dusty street below. A woman, her dress torn and face streaked with tears, was being dragged toward the town's water trough by a crowd of jeering men, led by Horace Dunfield, the wealthiest rancher in Johnson County. It was 1887, and in Salina, Wyoming territory, Horace Dunfield was accustomed to getting whatever he wanted. What he had wanted, apparently, was this young woman who had clearly refused him, and now she was paying the price for her audacity. Willow's hands trembled as she rushed for her shawl. Having arrived in Salina just 3 days prior to take up her position as the town's new schoolteacher, she had already heard whispers about Dunfield's temperament. The man had buried 2 wives already, and the townspeople spoke in hushed tones about the bruises that had adorned both women's arms and faces before their untimely deaths. By the time Willow reached the street, a sizable crowd had gathered. The woman was being held at the edge of the trough, Dunfield's meaty hand wrapped around her neck. "You'll learn to show proper respect," Dunfield growled, his face flushed with whiskey and rage. "No woman refuses Horace Dunfield." Willow pushed through the crowd, her heart hammering in her chest. "Stop this at once," she demanded, her voice stronger than she felt. Dunfield turned, his eyes narrowing at the interruption. "Mind your own business, Miss Ellis. This don't concern you." "Any act of cruelty in this town concerns me," Willow replied, chin raised despite her fear. "Release her immediately." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Dunfield's face darkened. "Seems like we got ourselves another woman who needs to learn her place." Willow took an instinctive step backward, suddenly aware of how alone she was. She had left everything behind in Boston following her father's death, seeking a fresh start in the West. Now, she wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. As Dunfield advanced toward her, the crowd parted to make way for a tall figure approaching on horseback. The powerful black stallion stopped just feet from where Willow stood, and the rider dismounted with easy grace, his spurs jingling softly against the packed dirt. "Evening, Dunfield," the newcomer said, his voice low and controlled. He pushed back his hat to reveal piercing blue eyes set in a sun-weathered face. "Seems like you're causing a disturbance." "This ain't your concern, Blackwell," Dunfield spat. Willow glanced between the 2 men. The newcomer Blackwell stood relaxed, but she noticed his right hand hovered near the pistol at his hip. "A man terrorizing women in the middle of the street is everyone's concern," he replied calmly. He turned to the woman Dunfield had been threatening and offered his hand, palm up. "Madam, you're free to go." The gesture was gentle, unexpected in its tenderness. The woman grasped his hand gratefully and scrambled to her feet, then disappeared into the gathering darkness, Dunfield's face contorted with rage. "You'll regret this, Blackwell." "I've regretted many things in my life, Dunfield," the cowboy replied, "but standing against a bully has never been one of them." The rancher looked around at the crowd, seemingly searching for allies, but found none willing to meet his gaze. With a final venomous glare, he stalked off toward the saloon, his cronies trailing behind him. Only when Dunfield had disappeared through the swinging doors did Willow realize she had been holding her breath. The crowd began to disperse, the excitement over for the evening. "You all right, madam?" The cowboy asked, turning his attention to Willow. "Yes, thank you, Mr. Blackwell," she said, smoothing her skirts nervously. "Blake Blackwell," he corrected with a slight nod. "Just Blake will do." "I'm Willow Ellis," she replied, "the new schoolteacher." His expression softened slightly. "Welcome to Salina, Miss Ellis, though I suspect this isn't the welcome you expected." "Indeed not," she agreed, unable to suppress a shiver despite the warm evening. "Does Mr. Dunfield make a habit of such behavior?" Blake's jaw tightened. "Dunfield believes his money gives him ownership of this town and everyone in it. He's especially hard on women who don't meet his expectations." "That poor woman," Willow murmured. "That was Sarah Miller. She works at the general store. Dunfield's been pursuing her since his last wife passed." Blake's tone made it clear what he thought of that pursuit. "And no one stops him?" Willow asked, appalled. Blake's eyes scanned the now empty street. Sheriff Peyton tries, but Dunfield owns his mortgage. Same goes for half the businesses in town. People are afraid. But you're not, Willow observed. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. My ranch is paid for, my cattle are healthy, I don't owe Dunfield or his bank a penny. That's admirable, Willow said, genuinely impressed. I've only been in Salina 3 days, and already I'm wondering if I've made a terrible mistake coming west. Give it time, Blake said. Salina's got good people. Dunfield's just the loudest of them. He glanced toward the boarding house. I should see you safely back. As they walked the short distance to Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, Willow felt her curiosity about this man growing. Are you from Salina originally, Mr. Blackwell? Born in Missouri, he replied. Came west after the war, found this land and decided to stay. The war? Willow asked. He didn't look old enough to have fought in the Civil War. Served under General Sheridan. I was young, too young probably. His expression closed, suggesting the topic was not one he cared to explore further. When they reached the boarding house porch, Willow turned to face him. Thank you again, Mr. Blackwell. What you did took courage. Blake shook his head. Standing up to men like Dunfield isn't courage, Miss Ellis, it's necessity. He touched the brim of his hat. Good evening. Willow watched as he returned to his horse, mounted with practiced ease, and rode off into the night. Only when he had disappeared from view did she enter the boarding house, her mind filled with thoughts of the mysterious cowboy who had intervened on behalf of a woman he barely knew, offering his hand when everyone else had stood by in silence. The next morning dawned clear and crisp, with the promise of summer heat to follow. Willow dressed carefully for her first day at the schoolhouse, selecting a practical navy blue dress with a high collar and pinning her hair in a neat bun. The position as Salina's schoolteacher was her opportunity for independence, a way to support herself after her father's death had left her with little more than debts and memories. As she made her way down the boarding house stairs, Mrs. Peterson intercepted her. Miss Ellis, I heard about what happened yesterday evening, the older woman said, her plump face creased with concern. You must be careful about crossing Horace Dunfield. I couldn't stand by and watch him mistreat that poor woman, Willow replied. Mrs. Peterson sighed. Your principles do you credit, dear, but this isn't Boston. Out here, a man like Dunfield has the power to make life very difficult. So I'm learning, Willow said. But surely not everyone in town submits to his bullying. Blake Blackwell doesn't, Mrs. Peterson conceded. But he's an exception. Runs the most successful cattle operation for 50 miles, completely independent of Dunfield's influence. Most folks aren't so fortunate. Willow thought of the quiet strength Blake had displayed the previous evening. Mr. Blackwell seemed like a decent sort. Something knowing flickered in Mrs. Peterson's eyes. Oh, he's more than decent. Finest man in the county, if you ask most. Lost his wife and child to fever 6 years back. Keeps to himself mostly now, except when someone needs help. She patted Willow's arm. But mind you, he's not the type to settle down again, so don't get any ideas. Mrs. Peterson, Willow protested, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. I've only just met the man, and besides, I came to Salina to teach, not to find a husband. Of course, dear Mrs. Peterson replied, not sounding convinced in the slightest. Well, you'd best be on your way. Wouldn't want to be late on your first day. The schoolhouse sat at the edge of town, a simple one-room building with a bell tower and freshly whitewashed walls. As Willow approached, she saw children of various ages playing in the yard, some engaged in a game of tag, others sitting in small groups talking animatedly. Her heart lifted at the sight. Whatever challenges Salina might present, these children deserved a proper education, and providing it would be her purpose. A tall boy of about 12 noticed her first. That's her, he called to the others. That's the new teacher. The children gathered around her, curious and excited. Willow smiled warmly. Good morning, I'm Miss Ellis, your new teacher. Is it true you're from Boston? A freckle-faced girl asked. Yes, it is, Willow confirmed. Pa says people from the east are too soft for Wyoming, a younger boy declared. Willow raised an eyebrow. Well, I suppose we'll find out if that's true, won't we? Now, shall we go inside and begin our day? Leading the children into the schoolhouse, Willow felt a surge of determination. She would prove herself to these children and to the town of Salina. This was where she belonged now, and no one, not even Horace Dunfield, would drive her away. The first week of school passed quickly. Willow found her students eager to learn, if somewhat behind in their studies. The previous teacher had left abruptly 3 months earlier, and the education of Salina's children had suffered in the interim. On Friday afternoon, as Willow was tidying the classroom after dismissing her students, she heard the sound of a wagon approaching. Looking up, she saw Blake Blackwell driving a buckboard loaded with lumber. He stopped in front of the schoolhouse and climbed down from the wagon. "Afternoon, Miss Ellis," he called, removing his hat as he approached the open door. "Mr. Blackwell," she greeted him with surprise. "What brings you to the schoolhouse? Heard you were in need of some repairs," he said, gesturing to the sagging porch steps and the broken shutters on one of the windows. "Thought I might lend a hand." Willow stepped outside, touched by the gesture. "That's very kind of you, but I couldn't impose." "No imposition," he assured her. "These kids deserve a proper place to learn." He glanced at the schoolhouse with a critical eye. "Won't take more than a day's work to set it right." Before Willow could protest further, Blake had already begun unloading the lumber. She watched as he worked, impressed by his efficiency and the quiet competence with which he moved. "I suppose I should thank you properly," she said finally. "Would you care to join me for supper at the boarding house this evening?" Blake paused, a plank of wood balanced on his shoulder. For a moment she thought he might refuse, then he nodded. "That would be nice, thank you." 7 o'clock, she suggested. "I'll be there," he promised. Willow returned to her classroom, her mind buzzing with questions about Blake Blackwell. Why had he really come to help? And why did the prospect of sharing a meal with him make her heart beat a little faster? That evening, Willow took extra care with her appearance, selecting a dress of soft green that her father had always said brought out the color of her eyes. She told herself it was simply a matter of showing proper gratitude to a man who had been kind enough to help with the schoolhouse repairs. But Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile suggested the landlady suspected other motives. Blake arrived precisely at 7, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his vest. He had left his hat and gun belt behind, and Willow was struck anew by how handsome he was, with his dark hair showing just a touch of silver at the temples and his blue eyes clear and direct. "You look lovely, Miss Ellis," he said simply. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwell," she replied, oddly pleased by the compliment, "and thank you again for your work on the schoolhouse, Mrs. Peterson had prepared a special supper in honor of their guest, and the conversation flowed more easily than Willow had expected. Blake asked thoughtful questions about her teaching methods and listened attentively to her answers. In turn, she learned more about his cattle ranch, the challenges of the harsh Wyoming winters, and his hopes for expanding his herd in the coming year. "How did you come to Salina?" Blake asked as they enjoyed apple pie for dessert. "It's a long way from Boston." Willow hesitated, uncertain how much to share. "My father passed away last year," she began. "He was a professor at Harvard, but he had difficulties with gambling. When he died, I discovered he had left considerable debts." Blake nodded, his expression sympathetic but not pitying. "I'm sorry for your loss." "Thank you," she said. "I saw the advertisement for a teacher in Salina and decided it was an opportunity for a fresh start. The salary isn't much, but it's enough to live on, and in time I hope to repay my father's creditors." "That shows character," Blake observed. "Taking on debts that aren't rightfully yours," Willow shrugged. "He was my father. I couldn't bear the thought of his name being tarnished." As the evening drew to a close, Blake thanked Mrs. Peterson for the meal and turned to Willow. "May I walk you out to the porch for a moment?" Outside, the night was cool and clear, with stars scattered across the vast Wyoming sky like diamonds on black velvet. Willow had never seen such stars in Boston, where the city lights and coal smoke obscured all but the brightest. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gazing upward. "It is," Blake agreed, though when she glanced at him, she found him looking not at the stars but at her. "Miss Ellis, Willow, I want you to be careful." The abrupt change of topic startled her. "Careful." "Dunfield hasn't forgotten what happened the other night," Blake explained, his expression grave. He's not a man who forgives easily, and he particularly dislikes being challenged publicly. A chill ran down Willow's spine that had nothing to do with the evening air. "Do you think he would try to harm me?" "Not directly," Blake said, "but he has ways of making life difficult for people who cross him. The school board answers to him. Most of its members owe him money or favors. Are you suggesting he might try to have me removed from my position?" Willow asked, alarmed. "I'm suggesting you be watchful," Blake said, "and if you need help, don't hesitate to ask for it." Willow straightened her shoulders. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Blackwell, but I won't be intimidated. My students need me, and I intend to stay in Salina as long as they do." A smile touched Blake's lips. "I believe you will at that." He took her hand briefly, the gesture recalling how he had offered his hand to Sarah Miller that night in the street gently, with respect. "Good night, Willow." "Good night, Blake," she replied, testing the familiarity of his first name. As he walked away, Willow couldn't help but wonder what it would be like to be the recipient of such a man's full attention, not just his protection or his assistance, but his heart. Then she shook her head at her own foolishness. She had come to Salina to teach, to build a life independent of any man. She couldn't afford to be distracted by romantic notions, especially involving a man who, according to Mrs. Peterson, had closed his heart after his wife's death. Still, as she prepared for bed that night, Willow found herself thinking of Blake's blue eyes and the quiet strength he radiated. It had been a long time since she had felt so drawn to someone, and the feeling was both exhilarating and terrifying. Blake Blackwell rode home under the starlit sky, his thoughts lingering on the evening he had just spent in Willow Ellis's company. It had been years since he had taken supper with anyone other than his ranch hands, and even longer since he had enjoyed a woman's conversation as much as he had enjoyed Willow's. The road to his ranch led past the Dunfield property, and Blake couldn't help but notice the lights still burning in the big house on the hill. Horace Dunfield was awake, perhaps plotting his next move against those who had defied him. Blake's jaw tightened at the thought. Dunfield was becoming more erratic, more dangerous. The incident with Sarah Miller had been just the latest in a series of escalating confrontations. And now Willow Ellis, with her Boston education and her fierce determination, had placed herself squarely in the man's crosshairs. He urged his horse to a faster pace, suddenly eager to reach the safety of his own land. As he crested the final rise, the lights of his ranch house came into view, a welcome sight after the tension of the evening. His foreman, Jim Carter, was waiting on the porch. "Everything all right?" Jim asked as Blake dismounted. "Fine," Blake replied. "Just had supper in town." Jim raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on the unusual occurrence. "Marshal Willis rode by earlier, said there's been trouble over at the McDermott place. Their cattle are missing." Blake frowned. "How many?" 20 head at least. Willis thinks it might be Dunfield's doing. McDermott refused to sell his water rights last month." "Sounds like Dunfield," Blake agreed grimly. "Have the men keep a close watch on our herd, double the night patrols." As he entered his house, Blake couldn't shake the feeling that Salina was approaching a reckoning. Dunfield's power had gone unchecked for too long, and sooner or later, someone would have to stand against him. Blake had avoided conflict since returning from the war, preferring to build his ranch and live quietly. But as he thought of Willow Ellis's determined face when she spoke of staying in Salina, despite the dangers, he wondered if the time for standing aside had passed. The following week brought unseasonably heavy rain, turning Salina's streets to rivers of mud and keeping most of the town indoors. Willow continued her teaching, gratified by her students' progress and the obvious pride they took in their schoolhouse's improved condition. Blake's repairs had not only fixed the immediate problems, but had added a new bookshelf and a sturdy coat rack. Both crafted with the same meticulous care he seemed to bring to everything he did. On Thursday afternoon, as Willow was preparing to dismiss her class, the schoolhouse door burst open to admit Horace Dunfield. The rancher's expensive boots were caked with mud, and his face wore a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Miss Ellis," he said, removing his hat with exaggerated politeness. "I hope I'm not interrupting." The children fell silent, their expressions ranging from curiosity to outright fear. Willow maintained her composure, though her heart had begun to race. "Not at all, Mr. Dunfield. We were just finishing for the day." She turned to her students. "Children, you are dismissed. Please remember to read Chapter 3 for tomorrow." The children gathered their things and filed out quickly, giving Dunfield a wide berth as they passed. Only when the last child had gone did Willow address her unwelcome visitor directly. "What can I do for you, Mr. Dunfield?" The rancher strolled around the classroom, examining the improvements Blake had made. "I see Blackwell has been busy," he remarked, running a finger along the new bookshelf. "Mr. Blackwell was kind enough to help with some necessary repairs," Willow replied neutrally. Dunfield turned to face her, all pretense of pleasantness gone. "I'll be direct, Miss Ellis. I don't appreciate outsiders coming into my town and stirring up trouble." "Your town?" Willow repeated, maintaining her composure despite her mounting anxiety. "I built Selena," Dunfield said, his voice hardening. "My money keeps it alive. The people here understand that, even if you don't." "I understand perfectly well that you use your wealth to intimidate people," Willow replied, her own anger rising to meet his. "But I won't be intimidated, Mr. Dunfield." The rancher's face darkened. "You'd be wise to reconsider that position. The school board serves at my pleasure. One word from me and you'll find yourself on the next stage east." Willow lifted her chin. "Is that a threat?" "Consider it friendly advice," Dunfield said, his smile returning. "Stay out of my business, Miss Ellis. Stick to teaching your abcs and we'll get along just fine." He placed his hat back on his head and moved toward the door. "Oh, and you might want to reconsider your association with Blake Blackwell. He's not the hero you seem to think he is." With that parting shot, Dunfield left, leaving Willow shaken but determined. She gathered her books and papers, trying to push aside the fear his visit had instilled. What had he meant about Blake not being a hero? And how seriously should she take his threat against her position? Lost in thought, Willow didn't notice the approaching rider until he was almost at the schoolhouse. Looking up, she was startled to see Blake himself dismounting in front of the building. "Willow," he greeted her, his expression concerned. "I just passed Dunfield on the road. Was he here?" "He was," she confirmed, unable to keep the worry from her voice. "He threatened to have me removed from my position if I don't, as he put it, stay out of his business." Blake's jaw tightened. "I was afraid of this. May I walk you back to town?" As they walked, Willow recounted her conversation with Dunfield, including his cryptic comment about Blake. "What did he mean by saying you're not a hero?" Blake was silent for a long moment. "During the war, I did things I'm not proud of," he finally said. "We all did." Dunfield knows some of those stories. He thinks they give him leverage. "I can't imagine you doing anything truly dishonorable," Willow said softly. Blake's gaze remained fixed on the muddy road ahead. "War changes a man, Willow. It makes you capable of things you never thought possible." They walked in silence for a time, the only sounds the squelch of their boots in the mud and the steady drip of rain from the brim of Blake's hat. "What will you do about Dunfield's threat?" Blake finally asked. Willow considered the question. "I'm not leaving Selena," she said firmly. "These children need an education, and I need this position. If Dunfield wants to try to remove me, he'll have to do it publicly, and I doubt the town will stand for it without good reason." "You're underestimating his influence," Blake warned. "Perhaps," Willow conceded. "But I refuse to live my life in fear of that man." They had reached the boarding house, and Willow turned to face Blake directly. "Thank you for walking with me, and for being concerned." Blake studied her face, his blue eyes serious. "Be careful, Willow. Dunfield doesn't make empty threats." As he turned to go, Willow impulsively caught his arm. "Blake, what he said about you, it doesn't matter. We've all done things we regret." Something flickered in Blake's eyes, surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. He covered her hand with his own briefly, then gently disengaged. "I'll see you soon," he promised. Watching him walk away, Willow felt an ache in her chest that had nothing to do with fear of Horace Dunfield. Despite her best intentions, she was falling for Blake Blackwell, a man who, by his own admission, carried shadows from his past. The following day, Willow was midway through a geography lesson when Sheriff Peyton appeared at the schoolhouse door. The lawman's weathered face was grave as he asked to speak with her privately. Assigning her students to read silently, Willow stepped outside to meet the sheriff. Is something wrong, Sheriff Peyton? Afraid so, Miss Ellis, the older man said, twisting his hat in his hands. The school board's called an emergency meeting for this evening. Well, they're considering your position. On what grounds? Willow demanded, though she already knew the answer. They're claiming you've been teaching inappropriate material, Sheriff Peyton said, not meeting her eyes, and that you've been conducting yourself in an unladylike manner. That's absurd, Willow protested. My curriculum is standard and my conduct is beyond reproach, the sheriff sighed. I believe you, Miss Ellis, but Dunfield controls the board. He's determined to see you gone. And you're willing to let that happen? Willow asked, disappointment coloring her voice. Sheriff Peyton winced at the accusation. I'm telling you now, aren't I? The meeting's at 7 at the town hall. You have the right to defend yourself. After the sheriff left, Willow returned to her classroom, struggling to maintain her composure. Her students watched her with wide, concerned eyes, sensing something was amiss. Miss Ellis, young Emma Jenkins asked, are you leaving us? Willow forced a smile. Not if I can help it, Emma. Now let's continue with our lesson. Who can tell me the capital of Montana Territory? By the time Willow dismissed her class that afternoon, word of the school board meeting had spread throughout Salina. Several parents approached her to express their support, though she noted that others avoided meeting her gaze. As she walked back to the boarding house to prepare for the evening's confrontation, Willow's mind raced. How could she defend herself against vague accusations of impropriety? And even if she could, would it matter if Dunfield had already decided her fate, Mrs. Peterson met her at the door, her kind face creased with worry. I've heard about the meeting, dear. It's an outrage, pure and simple. Thank you, Mrs. Peterson, Willow said, grateful for the support. I intend to fight this with everything I have. You'll have help, Mrs. Peterson assured her. Not everyone in this town bows to Horace Dunfield. As 7 o'clock approached, Willow made her way to the town hall, her stomach in knots but her resolve firm. To her surprise, a crowd had gathered outside the building. As she approached, several people called out encouragement. We're with you, Miss Ellis. Don't let them bully you, teacher. My Johnny's reading better than ever since you came. Inside the town hall, the 5 members of the school board sat at a long table on a raised platform. Horace Dunfield was not officially a member, but he sat prominently in the front row of the audience, his expensive suit and confident posture a stark contrast to the modest dress of most Salina residents. The board chairman, banker Herbert Simmons, called the meeting to order. We're here to discuss certain concerns about Miss Ellis's fitness as our school teacher, he began, his voice betraying his discomfort with the proceedings. What concerns exactly? A voice called from the back of the hall. Willow turned to see Blake Blackwell standing in the doorway, his tall figure imposing even at a distance. He moved to stand beside Willow, and the simple gesture of solidarity gave her courage. Mr. Blackwell, Simmons acknowledged nervously. As I was saying, concerns have been raised about Miss Ellis's conduct and teaching methods. By whom? Blake pressed. All eyes turned to Dunfield, who rose smoothly to his feet. By me, he said. I've heard troubling reports from several parents that Miss Ellis has been teaching material of a questionable nature and conducting herself in a way unbecoming a teacher. That's a lie, Emma Jenkins's father shouted from the crowd. My daughter's learning more with Miss Ellis than she ever did before. Other voices joined in, some supporting Willow, others backing Dunfield. The meeting quickly descended into chaos as townspeople argued amongst themselves. Sheriff Peyton finally restored order by firing his pistol into the ceiling. In the startled silence that followed, Willow stepped forward. May I speak? She asked, her voice clear and steady. Simmons nodded, looking relieved at the interruption. I came to Salina to teach, Willow began. That is my only purpose here. My curriculum follows the standard texts approved by the Territorial Education Board. My conduct has been that of a professional educator. She paused, gathering her thoughts. Mr. Dunfield has not made specific accusations because there are none to make. His objection to me is personal, stemming from an incident in which I intervened when he was publicly abusing a woman in the street. Murmurs swept through the crowd. Dunfield's face darkened with anger. If the board wishes to dismiss me for standing against such behavior, that is their right, Willow continued. But they should do so openly, not hide behind false accusations of impropriety. She's right, a voice called out. Sarah Miller, the woman Dunfield had attacked, pushed through the crowd to stand beside Willow. Mr. Dunfield is doing this because Miss Ellis stood up for me when he was hurting me. The room fell silent as Sarah described the incident in detail, how Dunfield had propositioned her, how he had reacted violently when she refused, and how Willow and Blake had intervened. By the time she finished, several board members were shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Simmons cleared his throat. "These are serious allegations, Mr. Dunfield." Dunfield rose to his feet, his face mottled with rage. "This is absurd. You're going to take the word of a shopgirl and an outsider over mine. I remind you, Simmons, who holds the note on your bank." The naked threat hung in the air. Blake stepped forward. "And I remind you, Dunfield, that attempting to use financial pressure to influence public officials is a federal offense. I'm sure the territorial governor would be interested to hear about it." Dunfield's eyes narrowed as he assessed Blake. "You're making a mistake, Blackwell." "No," Blake replied evenly. "You made the mistake when you thought you could bully this town forever." For a tense moment, it seemed Dunfield might resort to violence. Then, with a curt nod to Simmons, he stormed out of the hall. The board quickly voted to retain Willow as teacher, with Simmons adding an official apology for the misunderstanding. As the meeting broke up, townspeople crowded around Willow to offer congratulations and support. It was nearly midnight by the time the last well-wisher departed, leaving Willow alone with Blake in the now empty town hall. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm not sure I would have prevailed without your support." Blake shook his head. "You were magnificent, Willow. The town saw your strength tonight. They won't forget it." "What happens now?" she asked. "Dunfield won't simply accept this defeat." "No," Blake agreed, his expression somber. "He won't, but neither will we." He offered her his arm. "May I walk you home?" As they stepped out into the night, the stars overhead seemed brighter than before, as if celebrating their small victory. Willow knew the battle with Dunfield was far from over, but for tonight, at least, she had stood her ground and won. And with Blake Blackwell at her side, she felt ready to face whatever came next. The days following the school board meeting brought an uneasy peace to Salina. Horace Dunfield had retreated to his ranch, and rumors circulated that he was drinking heavily and raging at his employees. Willow continued teaching, heartened by the increased support from her students' parents, many of whom now greeted her warmly in the street or sent small gifts: fresh eggs, a loaf of bread, a bouquet of wildflowers to express their solidarity. Blake, too, had become a more frequent presence in her life. He often rode into town just as school was dismissing, ostensibly to check on his repairs to the schoolhouse, but Willow suspected his timing was deliberate. They would walk together, discussing books or current events or the progress of her students, their conversations flowing easily despite their different backgrounds. On a particularly fine Saturday in late May, Blake appeared at the boarding house with an unexpected invitation. "I thought you might enjoy seeing something of the countryside," he said, a touch of nervousness in his manner that Willow found endearing. "It's a beautiful day for a ride." Willow hesitated only briefly before accepting. The prospect of spending hours in Blake's company, away from the watchful eyes of Salina, was too tempting to resist. Blake had brought a gentle mare for Willow to ride, and they set out at a leisurely pace, heading west away from town. The landscape opened before them, rolling grasslands dotted with wildflowers, distant mountains still capped with snow despite the approaching summer. "It's breathtaking," Willow said, inhaling deeply. The air was so different from Boston's clear and sweet, scented with sage and pine. "This is why I stayed," Blake replied, his eyes scanning the horizon with obvious affection. "After the war, I couldn't go back east. Everything felt too closed in, too confined. Out here, a man can breathe." They rode for an hour, Blake pointing out landmarks and sharing stories of the land's history. Eventually, they reached a small creek, its banks shaded by cottonwood trees. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," Blake said as they dismounted. He spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked a picnic lunch from his saddlebag's fried chicken, biscuits, early strawberries, and a bottle of apple cider. As they ate, Willow found herself studying Blake's face, noting how his serious expression softened when he spoke of his land or his horses. There was a gentleness to him that belied his weathered exterior, a capacity for tenderness that showed in small gestures, the careful way he handed her a biscuit, how he ensured she had the most comfortable spot on the blanket, his attentiveness when she spoke. "What are you thinking about so intently?" Blake asked, catching her gaze. Willow blushed, embarrassed at being caught staring. "I was wondering about you," she admitted. "About what brought you west, really." Blake was quiet for a moment, his blue eyes thoughtful. "After the war, I couldn't settle," he finally said. "I tried going home to Missouri, but everything had changed, or maybe I had. I started drifting west, working cattle drives, taking whatever jobs came along." He paused, plucking a blade of grass and twisting it between his fingers. "I ended up in Cheyenne, broke and half-starving. A rancher named Joseph Morgan took me on, taught me the cattle business. When he died 3 years later, he left me enough money to buy my own place." Blake gestured to the land around them. "This became my home." "And then you married," Willow said softly, remembering what Mrs. Peterson had told her. Pain flickered across Blake's face. "Yes, Catherine, she was a schoolteacher like you," he smiled sadly. "We had 4 good years together, then the fever took her and our son, Thomas." "I'm so sorry," Willow said, resisting the urge to reach for his hand. "It was a long time ago," Blake said, though his eyes suggested the wound was still raw. "I learned to go on, to find purpose in the work, in building something that would last." They sat in companionable silence, the only sounds the gurgling of the creek and the occasional call of a meadowlark. Willow found herself wishing the moment could stretch on indefinitely, this peaceful interlude with a man she was increasingly certain she could love. As if reading her thoughts, Blake shifted closer on the blanket. "Willow," he began, his voice low and serious, "I need to tell you something about the war, about what Dunfield knows." Willow's heart quickened. "You don't have to, I do," Blake insisted. "I want you to hear it from me, not from him." He took a deep breath. "During the war, I served with Sheridan in the Shenandoah Valley. We had orders to destroy everything that might feed or support the Confederate Army." The pain in his eyes deepened. "We burned farms, mills, barns. We killed livestock, and sometimes civilians got caught in between." His voice faltered. "There was a farm near Harrisonburg. The owner tried to stop us from taking his horses. He had a gun. I shot him." Blake looked away, unable to meet Willow's gaze. "After he fell, I saw that his wife and children had witnessed the whole thing. The look in that woman's eyes, I still see it in my dreams." Willow's throat tightened with emotion. "You were a soldier following orders," she said gently. "That's what I told myself," Blake replied. "But it doesn't erase what I did. Dunfield knows because he was there. He served in the same unit. He uses it whenever he wants to remind me that I'm no better than he is." "But you are," Willow said firmly. "The difference is that you regret the harm you've caused. You try to make amends. Dunfield glories in his power to hurt others." Blake finally looked at her, his expression vulnerable in a way she had never seen before. "I've never told anyone else," he admitted. "Not even Catherine knew the full truth." The trust implicit in his confession moved Willow deeply. Acting on instinct, she reached out and took his hand. "Thank you for telling me," she said simply. Blake's fingers tightened around hers, and for a long moment they sat that way, connected by touch and by the understanding that had grown between them. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains when they finally packed up their picnic and prepared to ride back to town. As Blake helped Willow mount her horse, their eyes met, and something unspoken passed between them, an acknowledgement of feelings too new and fragile to name. The ride back was quieter, each lost in their own thoughts about what the day had revealed. When they reached the boarding house, Blake dismounted to help Willow down from her horse. As her feet touched the ground, his hands lingered at her waist. "Willow," he said softly. Whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by the sound of pounding hooves. Jim Carter, Blake's foreman, rode up in a cloud of dust, his horse lathered with sweat. "Blake," he called urgently, "there's trouble. Dunfield's men are at the north pasture." They're driving our cattle onto his land. Blake's expression hardened instantly. How many men? At least 6, Jim replied. They're armed. Blake turned to Willow, conflict clear in his eyes. I have to go. Of course, she said, trying to hide her disappointment. Be careful. He nodded, already mounting his horse. Jim, ride ahead. Tell the others I'm coming. No shooting unless absolutely necessary. As Blake wheeled his horse around, he looked back at Willow. I'll come to see you when this is resolved, he promised. Watching them ride away, Willow felt a knot of fear form in her stomach. Dunfield was escalating the conflict, moving from threats to outright theft. And worse, he was deliberately provoking Blake, perhaps hoping to force a violent confrontation. That night, Willow slept poorly, her dreams filled with images of Blake facing down Dunfield's men, of gunfire and blood. She woke before dawn, her sheets tangled around her, and knew with certainty that she would not be able to rest until she knew Blake was safe. After dressing quickly, Willow went downstairs to find Mrs. Peterson already in the kitchen, her plump face lined with worry. You've heard then? The landlady asked. Willow nodded. Blake went to confront Dunfield's men last night. I haven't heard anything since. Mrs. Peterson pressed a cup of coffee into Willow's hands. Sheriff Peyton rode out there late last night. The whole town's talking about it. Dunfield's claiming that Blackwell's cattle broke through the fence onto his land, and his men were just returning them to their proper pasture. That's absurd, Willow protested. Blake would never allow his fences to fall into disrepair. Of course not, Mrs. Peterson agreed. But it's his word against Dunfield's, and we both know which one carries more weight with certain people in this town. Willow paced the kitchen, too agitated to sit. I can't just wait here wondering what's happening. Mrs. Peterson studied her with knowing eyes. You care for him, don't you? Yes, Willow admitted, seeing no point in denial. More than I should, perhaps. There's no should when it comes to matters of the heart, the older woman said wisely. But be careful, my dear. Dunfield won't hesitate to use anyone Blake cares about against him. The warning sent a chill through Willow, but it didn't diminish her determination to find out what had happened. After finishing her coffee, she borrowed Mrs. Peterson's horse and buggy and set out for Blake's ranch. The road to the Blackwell ranch wound through rolling hills dotted with sagebrush and occasional stands of pine. In the early morning light, the landscape had an ethereal quality, mist rising from the creek beds and deer grazing cautiously in the open meadows. As she approached Blake's property, Willow was relieved to see no signs of ongoing conflict. The ranch house came into view, a substantial log structure with a wide porch and smoke rising from the chimney. Several men were working in the nearby corrals, moving with the purposeful energy of a normal workday. Jim Carter was the first to notice her approach. He set down the rope he was coiling and walked to meet her as she pulled the buggy to a stop. Miss Ellis, he greeted her, surprise evident in his voice. This is unexpected. I came to see if everything is all right, Willow explained, suddenly feeling foolish for her impulsive journey. After last night, understanding dawned on Jim's weathered face. Blake's inside, he said, gesturing toward the house. He'll be glad to see you. Willow tied the horse to the hitching post and made her way to the front door, her heart beating faster with each step. Before she could knock, the door swung open to reveal Blake, his shirt sleeves rolled up and a coffee mug in his hand. Willow, he said, genuine pleasure lighting his eyes despite the dark circles beneath them. Come in. The interior of the ranch house was simply but comfortably furnished, with sturdy wooden furniture, bookshelves lining one wall, and a large stone fireplace at the far end of the main room. Navajo rugs added warmth to the plank floors, and through a doorway, Willow glimpsed a well-equipped kitchen. This is lovely, she said, taking in the space. It suits you. Blake smiled, setting his coffee mug down on a side table. Catherine decorated it, he said. I haven't changed much since she passed. Willow nodded, understanding his desire to preserve something of the woman he had loved. I'm sorry to arrive unannounced, she said. I was worried after you left so suddenly yesterday. Blake's expression sobered. Dunfield's pushing for a fight, he said. He had his men drive about 30 head of my cattle onto his land, then claimed they had broken through the fence line. Mrs. Peterson told me, Willow said. Was anyone hurt? No, thankfully, Blake replied. Sheriff Peyton arrived before things got out of hand. He persuaded Dunfield to return the cattle, though I doubt that's the end of it. He gestured for her to sit in one of the comfortable chairs near the fireplace, then took a seat opposite her. "I'm sorry about yesterday," he said. "Our day was interrupted rather abruptly." "It's not your fault," Willow assured him, "though I did enjoy our time together very much." "As did I," Blake said, holding her gaze for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "In fact, I was hoping we might continue our conversation. Before Jim arrived, I was about to say something important." Willow's pulse quickened. "Yes." Blake leaned forward slightly, his eyes intent. "Willow, I know we haven't known each other long, but I feel a gunshot cracked in the distance, followed by shouts from the direction of the corrals." Blake was on his feet instantly, moving to the gun rack on the wall and taking down a Winchester rifle. "Stay here," he ordered, all trace of tenderness gone from his voice. "Lock the door behind me." Before Willow could protest, he was gone, the door closing firmly behind him. She moved to the window, her heart in her throat as she tried to see what was happening. Men were running toward the sound of the gunfire, which had come from somewhere beyond the barn. Ignoring Blake's instruction, Willow hurried out onto the porch. From this higher vantage point, she could see a group of riders approaching rapidly from the east, at least a dozen men, all armed. "Blake," she called out in warning. He turned at the sound of her voice, saw the approaching riders, and sprinted back to the house. "Get inside," he urged, taking her arm. "Dunfield's men are coming in force." As they reached the door, the first bullets struck the porch, splintering wood and sending Willow and Blake diving for cover inside the house. Blake slammed the door shut and began barricading it with furniture. "Jim and the others will have taken cover in the barn," he said grimly, moving to close the heavy wooden shutters on the windows. "They're well armed, but we're outnumbered." Willow's hands trembled as she helped him secure the house. "Why is Dunfield doing this? It's madness." "It's about power," Blake replied, checking the load in his rifle. "I defied him publicly. You defied him publicly. He can't allow that to stand without losing face." More gunfire erupted outside, followed by the sound of breaking glass as a bullet shattered one of the few windows they hadn't yet shuttered. Blake pulled Willow down behind a heavy oak table. "We need to get to the back of the house," he said. "The walls are thicker there." They crawled through the dining room into a narrow hallway that led to the bedrooms. Blake guided Willow into what appeared to be a study, with a small window that looked out over a vegetable garden and beyond to a stand of pine trees. "If things get worse, we can escape through here," Blake explained, indicating the window. "There's a path through those trees that leads to a small cabin. From there, you could reach town." "I'm not leaving you," Willow said firmly. Blake turned to her, his expression a mixture of frustration and admiration. "This isn't your fight, Willow. It became my fight the moment Dunfield threatened my position because I stood up for Sarah Miller," she countered. "And even if it wasn't before, it is now." Before Blake could respond, a voice called from outside, amplified by a speaking trumpet. "Blackwell, come out and face me like a man." Blake's jaw tightened. "Dunfield," he muttered. "Stay here." He moved back through the house to a front window, carefully peering through a gap in the shutters. Willow followed, unwilling to be left behind. Through the narrow opening, they could see Horace Dunfield sitting on a large bay horse in the yard, surrounded by his men. The rancher held a speaking trumpet in one hand and a revolver in the other. "I know you're in there, Blackwell," Dunfield called, "and I'd wager that schoolteacher is with you. Come out now and maybe I'll let your men live." Blake's grip on his rifle tightened. "He's bluffing," he said quietly to Willow. "Jim and the others are good men. They won't be taken easily." As if to confirm his words, a shot rang out from the direction of the barn and one of Dunfield's men tumbled from his horse. Dunfield's face contorted with rage. "Kill them all," he shouted to his men. "Burn the place to the ground." The gunfire intensified, bullets thudding into the walls of the house. Blake pulled Willow away from the window just as a flaming arrow arced through the air and landed on the roof. "They're trying to burn us out," Blake said grimly. He looked at Willow, his expression resolute. "I need to get to the barn. My men are pinned down there." "It's suicide," Willow protested, grabbing his arm. "You'll never make it across the open yard." "I have to try," Blake insisted. "There's a trapdoor in the pantry that leads to a root cellar. From there, a tunnel runs to the barn. We dug it as a precaution against Indian attacks years ago." He cupped her face gently, his calloused palm warm against her cheek. "Stay here, keep the rifle. If anyone but me tries to come through that door, shoot them." Willow nodded, her throat tight with fear. "Be careful," she whispered. Blake's eyes softened for a moment. Then, with a quick, fierce kiss that left her breathless, he was gone, moving silently through the house toward the kitchen. Left alone, Willow tried to focus on the immediate danger rather than the lingering sensation of Blake's lips on hers. She could smell smoke now. The fire on the roof was spreading. More arrows landed on the wooden shingles, their flaming heads igniting the dry timber. Through the gap in the shutters, Willow could see Dunfield's men spreading out, some taking up positions to maintain the barrage of gunfire, others moving toward the barn with torches. Dunfield himself remained on his horse in the center of the yard, directing the attack with obvious satisfaction. Time seemed to stretch endlessly as Willow waited, the smoke growing thicker, the crackling of flames overhead more insistent. Just as she was beginning to fear the worst, gunfire erupted from behind Dunfield's position. Blake and his men had emerged from the barn and were now attacking from an unexpected direction. The sudden reversal caught Dunfield's men off guard. Several fell immediately, while others scrambled for cover. Dunfield himself was nearly unhorsed as his mount reared in panic. Willow could see Blake moving from cover to cover, directing his men with hand signals. They were still outnumbered, but the element of surprise had given them an advantage. The sound of galloping hooves drew Willow's attention to the road, where a new group of riders was approaching rapidly. For a moment, she feared Dunfield had brought reinforcements. Then she recognized Sheriff Peyton at the head of what appeared to be a posse of townsmen. "Drop your weapons." Peyton's voice boomed across the yard. "This ends now." Caught between Blake's men and the sheriff's posse, most of Dunfield's hired guns chose to surrender. Only Dunfield himself seemed determined to continue the fight, wheeling his horse toward Blake with his revolver raised. "Blackwell." He roared, firing wildly. Blake dove for cover behind a water trough, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Dunfield's horse screamed and collapsed, throwing the rancher to the ground. He struggled to his feet, still clutching his gun. "It's over, Dunfield," Blake called, his rifle trained on the rancher. "Drop the gun." For a moment, it seemed Dunfield might comply. Then, with a look of pure hatred, he swung his weapon toward the house, toward the window where Willow stood watching. Blake's shot hit Dunfield squarely in the chest before he could pull the trigger. The rancher staggered, a look of disbelief crossing his face, then collapsed in the dust of the yard. The sudden silence was deafening after the chaos of the gunfight. Willow's ears rang as she watched Sheriff Peyton approach Dunfield's prone form, kneel briefly, then shake his head. Blake lowered his rifle, his expression grim but resolute. His eyes sought the house, found the window where Willow stood, and held her gaze across the distance. In that moment, despite the smoke and the blood and the destruction around them, Willow felt a profound certainty that they had survived not just Dunfield's attack, but the final barrier between them. The aftermath of the gunfight was a blur of activity, townsmen helping to extinguish the fires, the sheriff's men taking Dunfield's hired guns into custody, Doc Williams tending to the wounded. Willow moved through it all in a daze, helping where she could, trying not to think about how close they had all come to death. Blake had been everywhere at once, directing the firefighting efforts, checking on his injured men, conferring with Sheriff Peyton. He had barely had a moment to speak with Willow, though his eyes found hers frequently across the busy yard, conveying what words could not. As twilight fell, the immediate crisis had passed. The fires were out. The wounded, thankfully few and none critical, had been treated, and Dunfield's body had been taken to town for burial. Most of the townspeople had departed as well, leaving behind promises of help with rebuilding the damaged portions of the ranch. Willow sat on the porch steps, exhausted beyond measure. The house had suffered smoke damage and some structural harm to the roof, but it was still standing. The barn had fared worse, its eastern wall charred black and partially collapsed. Blake finally approached, sitting down beside her on the steps. His face was smudged with soot, his clothes torn and dirty, but to Willow, he had never looked more handsome. "You should have gone back to town with the others," he said gently. Willow shook her head. "My place was here." Blake's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Sheriff Peyton says it was clearly self-defense," he told her. "Dunfield fired first, and he was about to shoot at the house at you." "You saved my life," Willow said simply. "You saved mine first," Blake replied. "If you hadn't warned me about those riders." He trailed off, the alternative too grim to voice. They sat in companionable silence for a time, watching as the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The events of the day had created a bond between them that went beyond words, beyond the tentative feelings that had been growing before Dunfield's attack. "What happens now?" Willow finally asked. Blake turned to face her fully, his blue eyes serious in the fading light. "That depends," he said, "on you." "On me," Willow echoed, surprised. "Willow," Blake began, his voice low and earnest, "what I was trying to tell you earlier before all this happened. I've spent 6 years alone, convinced that chapter of my life was closed. Then you arrived in Salina, and suddenly I found myself thinking of possibilities I thought were long past." He squeezed her hand gently. "I know it's soon. I know you came west for independence, not to tie yourself to a rancher with a troubled past. But I can't let another day go by without telling you that I'm falling in love with you." Willow's breath caught in her throat. Despite all they had been through together, despite the kiss they had shared in the midst of danger, she hadn't dared hope for such a direct declaration. "Blake," she whispered, her voice unsteady with emotion. "I came to Salina seeking a new beginning, it's true, but I found something I never expected: someone who sees me as I truly am, who values my strength as well as my softness." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers gentle against his stubbled cheek. "I'm falling in love with you too," she admitted. "Perhaps I have been since the moment you offered your hand to Sarah Miller that night in the street." Blake's smile transformed his face, erasing the weariness and tension of the day. With infinite tenderness, he drew her closer and kissed her, not the desperate, fleeting kiss of a man facing death, but a deliberate, thorough kiss that spoke of commitment and future possibilities. When they finally parted, both a little breathless, Blake kept his arms around her. "Stay," he said simply, "not just tonight, but always." Willow smiled, feeling a certainty she had never known before. "Always," she agreed. The months that followed brought significant changes to Salina. With Horace Dunfield gone, the town began to emerge from the shadow of his influence. The bank, now under new management, offered fair terms to ranchers and farmers who had been struggling under Dunfield's predatory practices. The town council, freed from his manipulation, voted to build a proper town hall and to expand the schoolhouse to accommodate the growing number of students. For Willow and Blake, the summer passed in a sweet haze of courtship and reconstruction. The damage to the ranch was gradually repaired, with help from neighbors who had once been too intimidated by Dunfield to show such solidarity. Willow continued teaching, dividing her time between the schoolhouse and the ranch, learning the rhythms of ranch life under Blake's patient guidance. Their wedding took place on a perfect autumn day in early October, with the aspen trees glowing gold against the blue Wyoming sky. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with nearly the entire population of Salina in attendance. Sheriff Peyton gave the bride away, and Jim Carter stood as Blake's best man. As Blake took Willow's hand to place the ring on her finger, she was reminded of that first night in Salina, when he had extended his hand to Sarah Miller with the same gentle respect. It seemed fitting that their journey together had begun and culminated with such a gesture, a hand offered not in dominance, but in partnership. The years that followed brought both joy and challenges. Their first child, a son they named William Joseph, was born the following summer, with a daughter, Catherine Rose, arriving 2 years later. The ranch prospered under Blake's management, expanding to become one of the most successful operations in the county. Willow continued to teach until their third child was on the way, then devoted herself to raising their growing family and establishing a small school on the ranch for the children of their workers. Her reputation as an educator spread throughout the territory, and she occasionally advised the Territorial Education Board on curriculum development. On the 10th anniversary of their wedding, Blake surprised Willow with a journey east to visit her family in Boston. It was the first time he had been east of the Mississippi since the war, and though he found the city confining after the open spaces of Wyoming, he understood Willow's need to reconnect with her roots. Her relatives were initially skeptical of the weathered cowboy with the quiet manner, but Blake's obvious devotion to Willow and their children soon won them over. By the end of their month-long visit, Willow's cousins were extracting promises that the children would be sent east for proper schooling when they were older. "Will you miss it?" Blake asked as their train pulled away from Boston, heading west once more. The culture, the society, all the things Wyoming can't offer. Willow looked up from where she was helping their youngest child, Benjamin Thomas, with his picture book. "Sometimes I miss certain aspects," she admitted honestly. "The libraries, the concerts, the museums. But those are just things, Blake. They don't compare to what I found in Salina." Blake's hand found hers across the narrow space between their seats. Even after a decade together, the simple contact still sent a current of warmth through her. "What did you find in Salina?" he asked, though the look in his eyes suggested he already knew the answer. Willow smiled, thinking of the day they had met, of the hand he had offered to a woman in trouble, of all the days and nights since. "I found a home," she said simply. "I found you." As the train carried them westward, toward the vast open spaces of Wyoming and the life they had built together, Willow reflected on how far she had come from the uncertain young woman who had arrived in Salina that spring day. She had sought independence, and found instead an interdependence far more valuable, a partnership based on mutual respect and deepening love. Blake had often told her that the West changed people, stripped away pretenses, and revealed true character. In Willow's case, it had revealed a strength she hadn't known she possessed, and a capacity for love she had never imagined. And in Blake, beneath the taciturn exterior of the cowboy, it had preserved a fundamental gentleness that had survived war and loss and hardship. That gentleness had been evident in the hand he had offered on a dusty street in Salina, Wyoming, a simple gesture that had changed everything. A hand offered not to punish or control, but to support, to protect, to cherish. A hand that, even after all these years, Willow still reached for first when she needed strength or comfort or simple reassurance that she was where she belonged beside the quiet cowboy who had taught her that true strength lay not in domination, but in tenderness. And as they journeyed homeward together, surrounded by the family they had created, Willow knew with absolute certainty that she would never again fear being punished for standing by her convictions. Blake had shown her a different way, a way of gentle strength, of principled resolve, of enduring love. It was all she had ever truly needed, all she had ever truly wanted, though she hadn't known it when she first arrived in that small Wyoming town. And it had begun with the simple, profound gesture of a cowboy offering his hand gently when everyone else had stood aside. That was the moment everything had changed, the moment Willow Ellis had found not just a defender, but a partner, a lover, a husband. The moment Blake Blackwell had found not just a woman to protect, but an equal, a confidante, a wife. The moment two solitary journeys had become one shared path, leading to a future neither could have imagined alone, in a land that demanded much but gave even more to those with the courage to claim it. A future that continued to unfold day by day, year by year, hand in hand.